Hey everybody, welcome to Saga Saturday. We are here with, I am Ula Brenna's daughter. I'm a Norse Saga nerd, along with my fellow nerd, Kineheld. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Dame Kineheld, the library. I am a language nerd, a bit of a literature nerd. I am here for talking about whatever cool, old, dead language stuff you want to talk about. And so today what we're going to be doing is talking about a story called The Story of Auðun of the West Fjords. Sometimes it's called The Story of Auðun and the Polar Bear, which is unfortunately a bit of a spoiler for the main event. But just pretend like you didn't hear the spoiler and, be prepared for some excitement. I am grabbing my notes, which are behind me. So the story of Auðun and the Polar Bear is recorded in 3 different manuscripts. The earliest example of it is from Morkinskina, which was written about 1275. Then we have the Flattier book, which is about 1390. And Hulda, which was about 1350 to 1347. Those are 3 Icelandic manuscripts. And the story itself falls within the saga of Harald III. Harald III is a Norwegian king. I don't have that. Yeah, Harald's the Norwegian and Sven is the Dane. Correct. So Harald, it's in the reign of Harald III, which is about 1047, or well, not about. It is 1047 to 1066. The kind of the events that are going on where in the saga where the story is set is that Harald and Sven have been warring for quite a while, and so they're in this military conflict, and then this guy from Iceland shows up, and so that's where our story begins. And I will start the story, and then so I'll read chapter 1. Ula's going to read chapter 2, and then I'll do 3. She'll do 4. There was a man named Auðun. His family came from the West Fjords, and he had little money. He sailed abroad from the fjords under the supervision of a good farmer named Thorstein and the skipper Thorir, who had been staying with Thorstein that winter. Auðun had been living there too, working for Thorstein in exchange for provisions and passage abroad. Auðun put most of what money he had away for his mother before he boarded the ship. It was intended to pay for 3 years' food and lodging. They set sail. Their journey went well, and Auðun spent the following winter with Thorir, who owned a farm in More. The next summer, they traveled to Greenland and spent the winter there. It is mentioned that Auðun bought a bear there, a great treasure for which he traded everything he owned. The following summer, they sailed back to Norway. They had a good voyage, and Auðun had his bear with him. He planned to travel south to Denmark to meet King Sven and give him the animal. Now, when he arrived in the south of the country where the king was staying, he left the ship, leading the bear behind him, and rented a room. King Harald was soon told that a bear, a great treasure owned by an Icelandic man, had arrived there. The king immediately sent men to summon him, and when Auðun appeared before the king, he greeted him. The king returned his greeting and asked, "Do you have a great treasure of a bear?" He answered that he did have a bear. The king asked, "Would you sell me the animal for the same price you paid for it?" He answered, "I do not want to do that, my lord." "Would you then," the king asked, "let me give you double what you paid? That would be fairer if you have traded everything you own for it." "I don't want to do that, my lord," he answered. The king said, "Will you give me the bear then?" He answered, "No, my lord." The king asked, "What will you do with it then?" "Go," he answered, "to Denmark to give it to King Sven." King Harald said, "Are you so ignorant that you have not heard about the enmity between our countries? Or do you reckon that your luck is so great that you can go with treasures where others cannot safely travel, even though they do so of necessity?" Auðun answered, "My lord, this is in your power, but I will not agree to do anything other than what I have attended." The king then said, "Why not go ahead then, and go on your way as you please. But come and see me when you return and tell me how King Sven has rewarded you for the bear. It may well be that you are a fortunate man." "I promise to do that," said Auðun. He then traveled south along the coast and east into Vik, from there on to Denmark. But by then all of his travel money was spent, and he was forced to beg for food, both for himself and the bear. He met a steward of the king named Aki and asked for provisions for himself and the bear. "I plan," he said, "to give the bear to King Sven." Aki told him he would sell him provisions if he wanted, but Auðun replied that he had no money to pay for them. I want, nonetheless, he said, to find a way to take the bear to the king. I will give you the provisions you need to reach the king, but in exchange, I want to own half the bear. You should consider the fact that the bear will die if you do not have the money for the food you need. Then you will not have any bear at all. But when Auðun had thought about what the steward had proposed, he found it reasonable. So they agreed that he would sell Aki half the bear, and now the king should be the judge of the whole arrangement later. Excuse me. Sorry. Now both of them were to go see the king together. So they went to see the king and stood before his table. The king pondered over who this man who he didn't know was, and asked Auðun, who are you? Auðun answered, I am an Icelandic man, my lord, and I have just come from Greenland and Norway. I wanted to give you this bear. I gave everything I owned for it, but I've made a blunder, for now I only own half the bear. He then told the king what had taken place between the steward Aki and himself. The king asked, is that what he says true, Aki? It is true, Aki replied. The king asked, did you think it was appropriate, given the fact that I have made you a powerful man, to impede and hinder a man from bringing me a treasure that he has given all his possessions to buy, when King Harald thought it advisable to give him safe conduct, even though he is our enemy? Now consider how fair this was on your part. Why, you deserve to be killed. I'm not going to go that far, but you will leave the country immediately and never be caught in my eyesight again. But you, Auðun, I will thank you as if you had given me the entire bear. And please, do stay. He accepted that and remained with King Sven for a while.
After some time had passed, Auðun said to the king, I'm now eager to leave here, my lord. The king answered, hesitating somewhat, where do you plan to go if you do not care to remain here with us? He replied, I want to make a pilgrimage to Rome. If your plan had not been so noble, the king replied, your eagerness to leave here would have displeased me. The king then gave him a very great deal of silver, and he traveled south with a group of pilgrims. The king made all the arrangements for his journey and asked him to come around to see him when he returned. Auðun then went his way until he arrived in Rome. When he had stayed there as long as he wished, he headed back, but on the way he fell terribly ill and lost a great deal of weight. All of the money the king had given him for the journey was used up, so he was reduced to vagrancy and had to beg for food. He grew bald and was quite miserable. He arrived back in Denmark at Easter and went to where the king was staying, yet he did not dare show himself in public. He waited in the wing of the church and planned to meet the king as he walked to church later that evening. But when he saw the king and all his men all dressed up, he could not bring himself to appear before them. When the king went to feast in the hall, Auðun was fed outside, as in the custom with pilgrims, while they are still bearing their staff and scrip. Now that evening, when the king went to vespers, Auðun planned to talk with him, but as much as he hesitated before, he did so even more now while the king's men were drunk. As they walked back inside, the king noticed a man who did not seem to have the courage to approach him. So when his men had gone inside, the king turned and said, let him come forward now, he who wishes to speak with me. I have a suspicion you must be that man. When Auðun came forward and fell down at the king's feet, the king scarcely recognized him. As soon as the king realized who he was, though, he took Auðun's hand and welcomed him. You have changed much, he said, since we last met, and he led him inside. Now when the king's men saw him, they laughed at him. But the king said, you have no cause to laugh, for he has better provided for his soul than you have. The king then had a bath prepared for him and gave him clothing, and Auðun remained there with him.
It is told that sometime during the spring, the king invited Auðun to remain with him permanently and told him that he would make him his cupbearer and honor him highly. Auðun said, God reward you, my lord, for all the honor you would bestow upon me, but as a matter of fact, I am thinking of sailing to Iceland. The king replied, that seems an odd choice. Auðun said, I cannot live with the fact, my lord, that I am held in honor here with you, while my mother is a vagrant in Iceland. For the provisions I left there for her before I sailed from Iceland will now have been exhausted. The king replied, that was well and nobly put, and you will turn out to be a fortunate man. That reason alone could make up for your leaving here acceptable to me. Stay here with me now until a ship is prepared. And so he did. One late spring day, King Sven walked down to the docks where men were preparing ships to sail to various countries, to the Baltic, to Saxony, to Sweden, and to Norway. He and Auðun came upon a beautiful ship that was being outfitted. The king asked, "How do you like this ship, Auðun?" He answered, "Very well, my lord." The king said, "I want to give this ship to you as repayment for the bear." He thanked him for the gift as best he could. After a while, when the ship was ready, King Sven said to Auðun, now you wish to leave, and I am not going to hinder you. But I have heard that your country is poorly provided with harbors, and that in many places it's only open coastline, which is dangerous for ships. Now say you are shipwrecked, and you lose your ship and goods. Then you will have little to show for what you have met King Sven, and given him a treasure. The king then gave him a leather pouch full of silver, so that you won't be left entirely penniless if you are shipwrecked, if you manage to hold on to this. It could still happen, the king continued, that you lose this too. Little good it would do you when you have met King Sven and given him treasure. The king then drew a ring off his arm and gave it to Auðun and said, even if things turn out so badly that you are shipwrecked and you lose this money, you will not be penniless if you make it ashore, for many survive shipwrecks wearing gold. And it will be still evident that you have met King Sven if you hold the arm ring. I would advise you, though, he said, not to give the arm ring away, unless you feel you must repay a very great favor done to you by a noble man. Then give that man the arm ring, for it would benefit a man of high standing to accept it. Now, farewell.
Auðun then set sail and arrived in Norway, where he had his cargo carried ashore. This was a greater chore than it had been the last time he was in Norway. He then went to see King Harald to keep the promise he had made him before he sailed to Denmark. He greeted the king warmly. King Harald returned his greeting and said, "Sit down and drink with us." And so he did. King Harald then asked, how did King Sven reward you for the bear? Auðun replied, "By accepting the gift from me." The king said, "Why, I would have done that. What else did he give you for it?" Auðun replied, "He gave me silver so that I could make a pilgrimage." Then King Harald said, "King Sven gives many men silver for pilgrimage and for other things, even when they do not bring him treasures. Now what else did he give you?" He offered, Auðun replied, "to make me his cupbearer and to bestow high honors upon me." "Nice gesture," said the king, "but surely he gave you something more." Auðun replied, "He gave me a knor with goods most highly desired here in Norway." "Graciously done," said the king, "and I would have rewarded you likewise. Did he give you anything else?" Auðun replied, "He gave me a leather pouch full of silver and said that I would not be penniless even if my ship were wrecked off the coast of Iceland." The king said, "Splendid. Even I would not have done that. I'd have considered myself free from obligation after giving you the ship. Did he give you anything else?" "He did indeed give me more, my lord," Auðun said. "He gave me the arm ring that I bear on my arm and told me that all the money could be lost, but I would still not be penniless if I had the ring. He told me not to give it to anyone unless I felt obliged to repay a noble man so dearly that I would be willing to part with it. And I have now found that man, for you had the power to deprive me of both the bear and my life. Yet you let me travel in peace to the places where others could not go." The king warmly accepted the gift and gave Auðun fine gifts in return before they parted. Auðun set aside his money for the journey to Iceland and traveled there early that summer. He was considered an exceedingly fortunate man. Thorstein Giddason, I butchered that, is descended from this man, Auðun.
So I actually really like this story. It's a very short narrative, and it's very encapsulated, right? The whole thing. He leaves Iceland, he comes back. You get a happy ending at the end, right? In that regard, I find it really quite a delightful story, and I'm kind of bummed that I didn't know about it until now, which is a little embarrassing because it's in a book that I've had since. Like, I've had this book long enough that it was back when I would write clear.
Right? Let me check mine. No.
So it's not as though I haven't had the opportunity to read this story before. But some of the things I really like about it are the humorous bits. So you have the exchanges between the kings where he's like, "That was a good, I would have done that. I wouldn't have gone that far." Those kind of things. I also, as somebody who lives in sort of on the limes of the world, on the edges of the world, right? This notion that in all of his travels, so Auðun goes as far as to Rome on pilgrimage,
Crazy.
right? So he's from the West Fjords. The West Fjords at the time were an incredibly harsh part of Iceland to live in. It was not in
Probably
like near
still is.
it is, yes. Though they have the internet now, so
Fair enough.
And central heating.
Right.
But so you're not in the center of society. Well, that popped.
We're just falling apart all over the place today.
So you're not in the center of the world in Iceland. But so he goes to the center of the Scandinavian world, to Norway, the courts of Norway and Denmark. And then he goes all the way to Rome. And at the end of it, he's like, no, I'm going back to Iceland.
Going back to Iceland because my mom's there.
Yeah. Which is a really sweet, like,
sweet.
He loves his mom.
Well, he set her up for 3 years before, because he knew he was going to be gone for a good length of time. So he, set her up and made sure she had funds for lodging and food, which is fantastic. And then it disappears for 3 years. I can't imagine going from the West Fjords of Iceland to all the way down to Rome. Like, that's just a crazy journey. Some of the things that I really like about this story and that picks it out to me is, he's a lucky man. He really is. Two warring kings have supported him on his journeys because he had a bear. Like, maybe I'll go get a bear. I wonder if I'll, get some more respect if I get that. And he even defies the kings. He defied Harold by not giving him the bear, and Sven by not staying on permanently. So he was lucky. He was fortunate that he was supported in all of this, even though he was defiant. It just makes me wonder if it's comparable to Norway and Denmark helping poor Iceland, right? Iceland was not a good place to be. They were very poor. They had all of the troubles in the world. So I think that there's some correlation there also. And then little things like he came back to Denmark on Easter, or Norway, whichever one he came back to. He came back on Easter again. So we're talking about the Christianity and the conversion. This was written around the conversion. And is that the pilgrimage to Rome? I'm just curious, is that I'm assuming that's because Auðun is converted and wants to go to Rome, right? And in theory, bring it back. Like, again, it's a lot of the stories that we talk about have a lot of Christianity, convergence and overtones. But the gift giving part of it is fantastic. So gift giving in the Norse culture was strong, and it was a reciprocal thing. Gifts were very rarely one-sided. It was, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Yeah.
So two things. One, on the conversion, the conversion date for Iceland is the year 1000, which is nice and easy to remember.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about this story probably taking place, so it's, what did we say?
1050-ish.
Yeah. So they've had Christianity for about 50 years.
That's not long.
Accepted that is by the populace.
Right.
But clearly for Auðun, it is something that he has adopted because he's willing. I'm stabbing myself in the neck with a pin now. He's willing to travel so far afield, all the way to Rome. But it's a couple of things that I wanted to hit on. Was one of the papers that I was reading talks about this, probably not as an oral history piece, that this is honestly like a fictional narrative is what they postulate, because it's such a perfect story. It's
so far-fetched. It really
So if we're thinking about this being written later than 1050, like the events are set in 1050, but kind of later, right? That the idea that he is a Christian and he has accepted it makes more sense, because now you're talking about the 1200s. At this point, Christianity's been around in Iceland for 200 years, and it is the law of the land, right? But then you also mentioned luck, and we both of us read the Nolan article that I'll put in the biography at the end of this. And one of the things I thought was really cool was that Nolan talks about another author, Gernbech's theory that luck and honor are identical, or at least they're tied up with each other. So in this case, Auðun's luck is kind of self-fulfilling. He is good with people, which itself is a form of luck. And so because he's good with people are willing to help him, and people helping you is a form of luck. So his charisma, or his his maybe not now. I've been playing The Sims too much, so this is like the thing that I've been thinking about. But his willingness to put himself out there and to do the courageous thing and say no to the king. So he demonstrates courage in his like, nope, I'm going to do the thing I said I'm going to do. And the king respects that. The king sees the courage and sees the courage of his trip. Like when you think like the Dennis Sven makes an excellent point that sea travel, yes, the Norse have been doing this since 793, right? Like
dangerous trade though. Like that, anything could go wrong at the drop of a hat. It's
so, so here you have, he's undertaking a courageous trip. The king acknowledges his courage in saying no, which is an excellent, like it's just as dangerous to say no to your end. It's more courageous to say no to your friends as your enemy. I don't know, whatever the Hogwarts thing is.
Yes.
Right, but it's so he's saying no to a king, all this kind of stuff. So that courage is part of his luck, and and that's how he survives. And then at the end, he is a lucky man. He was a fortunate man.
He's a very fortunate man. And the gift giving, I wondered is, now granted this is we're most likely a fictional tale. With the gift giving, is this tale really about a conduit between the king of Denmark and the king of Sweden, of Norway? To gift giving in Norse culture was both a gracious thing and a competitive thing. Mm-hmm. There was competitive gift giving. Yes. There was like, oh, I've got this shiny thing. Well, I'll counter it. It's like playing poker. Like I'll see that and raise at that. Was Auðun a conduit of true gift giving and graciousness, or was he a conduit of competitive gift giving? And was it trying to end this war, or was it the little needles to keep the war, this feud going? Was it an attempt at peace? Maybe. So,
I know we're running short on time.
We are. We have like 8 minutes.
But one of the things that I was reading in, I want to say it was the Viking Way, Price's Viking Way. It might have been that. I've got it in notes somewhere. But is the notion that gift giving creates an obligation. Yeah. So that obligation can be returned with another gift, and that's that competitive gift giving, mm-hmm. or with service. Yes. So here Sven is giving this priceless. So you've got Auðun who's given up his worldly possessions for this bear, which makes the value of the bear great, very, very great. Yeah. So he gives the bear, and so the king then gives him the ship, which has a very high value, and then gives him silver, which I guess like you can see the king isn't matching the gift. He's not giving up all his worldly possessions,
right? But
he's acknowledging the sacrifice involved in the gift, and a little bit acknowledging the fact, I think, that his steward, this man that he has honored, tried to take some of that gift away. So maybe the silver is a little bit of an apology, like I raised up.
Well, because Aki's kind of not a good guy,
right? And the king does acknowledge, like he acknowledges that to Aki and says like, you're banished, buddy. But I feel like the silver is maybe a little bit of a gift in recompense.
I can see that. Oh, absolutely. I think that's absolutely.
Then you have the armoring, and the armoring is a gift that has to be met with service. Yeah. So he says, I want you to carry my name across to whoever you give this gift to. And you're supposed to, like, as Auðun does, he shares the story of how he got the armoring, right?
Exactly.
And that elevates Sven's name, that Sven gave him this armoring and said, I am a king, and as a king, I tell you, you can only give this to somebody of great renown. And so he carries that onus, but then he carries that onus to Harold and acknowledges Harold's renown, and in a way uses Sven's gift, so using Sven's weight to acknowledge Harold's renown.
Right.
That's a gift to Harold, and now Harold's got to meet it.
Yes.
And Harold now owes a gift to Sven.
And
so I think that's the beginning of that peace process.
Yeah.
So now Sven is owed a debt by Harold, and Harold has to meet it.
Exactly.
Something, and that's
something. And what is that? Because it's, a silver armoring is a fantastic gift, and especially with the honor behind it, the
Right.
story behind it. So yeah, what do you then give your feuding king, right?
Right.
I don't know. So we only have a couple minutes, and I actually can't tell if this is truly streaming to Facebook because Facebook is being weird.
I couldn't find it.
I know. I don't know what's going on.
But it's recording, so.
It is recording. So I want to, both of us found this same interesting quote from a scholar, the scholar Josie Nolan from the Trinity College Dublin. And her quote, it is not Auðun who acts as a typical Icelander in a story about kings, but Harald and Sven who act as typical kings in a story about an Icelander. And it's totally true. The Icelander stories are typically much harsher, much more bloodthirsty, more, there's usually a lot more death and destruction or poop demons or,
Right.
Right. So I thought that was a great quote. I keep knocking my table. And yeah, Harald and Sven they act as kings in an Icelander story instead of this token grubby Icelander being in a story about kings, right? Yeah.
And I think something else that Nolan notes is that there's a general concern about and simultaneous fascination with kings. So Icelanders are not entirely sold on the concept of kings. They themselves had not had a native kingship. It gets imposed later, from Central Scandinavia.
Yeah.
But so Sven and Harald, both of them have their faults. And they are not placed on great pedestals as kings. And Auðun is happy to tell both of them no, just as he might tell his neighbor no. He's like, that's nice. You're the king. Cool. Hard pass, buddy. Right. I'm going back home.
Yeah. Talking back to kings, I have some experience in that. And sometimes it doesn't go as well as you hope it does.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes great, though.
Indeed.
Well, do we want to wrap up this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could keep talking for another hour, but
we could because we're nerds. But we both have other things we need to do. Like I said, I'm not. It says it's streaming live to Facebook, but I couldn't find it. But Facebook is being a jerk today. But it is recording, and I will post this onto both the Saga Saturday YouTube channel as well as Back to This Event page, just so that everybody can see it. Because I have a sneaking suspicion that you and I are talking to ourselves right now. Well, which is fine because I love conversing with you.
I love talking to you too. So I think next time, we haven't decided what we're going to talk about next time because we don't have Bear C around to talk to. He's got a mundane event today.
Yes.
But as soon as we know that, we will let other people know. And we will also let you know if we'll be on in a week or in 2 weeks.
Yeah, we've had to do some schedule shuffling for various reasons. So we'll work out try to get back to a consistent plan. Oh.
All right. So Ula, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you, and I will talk to you later.
You got it.